Okay, then it's on. All right. Good morning, good morning. Let me turn music down. All right, good morning, everyone. We will start with market reports, which is absolutely nothing, no inventory. 1,000 here, 600 there, 800 there. I'm sure you guys are out there and you understand. I am expecting new home builders to start closing some more homes now that lumber is coming down in price. So get ready to start seeing banners out, new homes for sale. I think permitting is going to start increasing for us now that the summer's here. And they're anxious to sell new homes. So people that are on the fence for selling their homes, I would say let them know that new homes will beef up if that's what they're looking to move into, because they've got to have somewhere to move, right? And if you time it correctly, it should be okay. I think we are at less than 3,600. So did active and coming soon, there's 3821 matches, and that's going to be condo, single family townhouses. And we're still selling 5,000 homes a month. So do the math and be strategic on your offers. So that's what we're going to run through today is counter offers versus addendums. What's the difference, what you should use during a transaction, and what to do to get the contract in order. All right. Any questions on the market? I think everybody's adapting to it. Let's go to the transaction desk and concentrate on contracts. All right, so forms. Let's go into residential, not commercial. And everything's in alphabetical order, so there are a bazillion addendums that can possibly be used for whatever you're doing. There's an addendum for animal assistance. So if you're doing leases and you have somebody that has a service animal, that's the addendum you would attach to your lease or your lease application. We don't do any property management here, so I'm not going to waste time on property management. Addendum for lender short sale approval, we're not doing a lot of those right now. But there is one in here I want to run through because I'm seeing more and more of this turning up as a negotiation tool. And that is these two. Addendum to RPA. So this is after your residential purchase agreement. An addendum to RPA post possession, and then addendum to RPA prior possession. So let us address the first one, which was post possession. What Okay, so this form, I'm seeing a lot of contracts that say that the seller can remain in the property up to 30 days, 60 days. That's going to come down to what the lender will allow, whether it's FHA, VA. Most of them are 60 days maximum. So if you have a seller leasing back, this is the form that you will use. And now we just got this one updated. I think it was like a couple months ago. Bottom, February 2021. So a couple of the main points is that this is not intended for possession longer than 60 days. So we noticed that need because we didn't want to create tenancy with the seller. So if you are writing an offer that says the seller can stay in a property, we kind of want it restricted to less than 60 days. That keeps it as a temporary occupancy. So now you can put this in the purchase agreement at the bottom in additional terms. It says buyer will allow seller to lease back for X amount of days. But prior to close of escrow, you want this in order because this deals with how much they're paying per day, what's the last day of the occupancy, and then what's the security deposit. The other thing is it kind of alleviates any accountability for the buyer and the agents. So it's line I of section 2. Seller agrees to hold buyer and the agents or agents in this transaction harmless from any claims from damages or injury to seller or any person. So we're letting the seller know that they're occupying at their own risk. And then we've established terms and dates, and that's going to be an addendum to the purchase agreement. Okay. So you kind of address it generally in the contract in additional terms, but then this would go in so that we can instruct escrow how much money to hold, how long to do the lease for, and that's where all that money stays in escrow. So post-possession. All right. Any questions from live audience out there? Now let's go in on a similar one. Now this one you would use addendum 4. Prior condition. All right, so this one is an addendum for prepossession. So this is where your buyer was expecting to close this Friday, right? And unbeknownst to the buyer, the lender couldn't perform in time, so they're not going to be able to record until July 6th. Seller is okay with the buyer moving in, but we need to make sure that nobody's responsible in case something happens while the buyer isn't there. Okay, so this one will address the buyer taking possession prior to the actual close. In Nevada, our close of escrow is once it's recorded. So we are going to use this form and we're going to establish terms again. So it's going to have the term and how much per day is being charged. So this instructs escrow. Any addendum is instructing escrow what to do with funds. And I like to have it all done at escrow because then you're not handling funds or anything of that nature. Again, the most important thing for me on this contract is buyer now, instead of seller, agrees to hold seller and this agent in this transaction harmless from any claims for damages or injury to seller or any person or to any property as a result of this addendum. So because they're occupying it before they're taking possession, they're still under the seller's fire hazard. So we want to notify them of that. And it states that in number 3, and then that the buyer is responsible for repair. So prior to letting that buyer move in, make sure you have that walkthrough completed so that they know that they're receiving that property in order or the way that they want to receive it. Don't do the walkthrough after they're possessing the property. That's the only advice I can give you. That covers you that the walkthrough is done prior to them taking occupancy. If there is damage and they come back later and say, hey, well, we want this repaired, it's a little bit too late at that point. Okay, those are 2 important ones. I'm going to go back in and these are after the purchase agreement has been agreed to. So prior to that, we're looking at counteroffers. That's the difference between addendums and counteroffers. Addendums are after a purchase agreement is in order, signed by all parties. We have an agreement to purchase, we have an agreement to close, and we have an agreement of due diligence period. That's your purchase agreement, and it's signed and dated by the buyer and the seller. Anything after that's going to be an addendum. So prior to a purchase agreement being executed, we are looking at counteroffers. And we've got basically the regular counteroffer or additional page if you need to write a story. So I've never had to use the additional page. Normally I just use the counteroffer 1, counteroffer 2, counteroffer 3, and we just go in that order back and forth until the beauty of the counteroffer is it's always addressing who it's to. So whether it's 1 or 2, it's attention Joe Smith, Coldwell Banker. And then when Joe Smith counters back to you, it's attention Corey Schaefer, Cornell Realty. So that we know who that counteroffer is being addressed to, and that this is what the buyer or seller are negotiating. So this is the proper form to use prior to a full acceptance. So full acceptance is what you're sending into escrow, and that's what they're going off of. Anything after that would be an addendum. Is it okay to use an addendum if the RPA is signed and accepted? Yes. Addendums are okay, but shouldn't change the terms of the purchase agreement unless necessary. So if you're still going back and forth on price, this is the form to use. Pricing shouldn't be the back and forth on an addendum unless the appraisal came in less and then now you have to adjust the pricing. Then an addendum would be in order. But if you're still negotiating price or you're negotiating how long you need to get your loan done or get your inspection done, this is the initial form to the purchase agreement. And then addendums. So on addendums, make sure they're in order. I like 1, 2, 3, or if it got a little crazy and there's an addendum 1A because you're still addressing something from addendum 1, that's fine. Addendum 1A, 1B, and then you can go to an addendum 2. Less is best, and keep it simple, but try to keep them in numerical or alphabetical order so we know which order they came in. What we look at first is whether it's a 1, 2, or 3. If that's confusing, then we just look at the dates at the bottom when they were signed. Down here. You always need to make sure you have a date and a time because that's what we're looking for when you say, hey, can you help me out on this contract? I'm looking for chronological events and putting them in order before I talk to the client. So that's why we want them dated and timed and signed. We try to keep them as fluent as possible with buyer or seller so we know who's signing. It should automatically populate the names once you put the contacts in. And then there's also the expiration of, well, you have until 3 p.m. today to respond, because then you can pull that off of the table. That's the beauty of the counteroffer versus the addendum. If you just send it, we're just waiting for a signature. There's no expiration on that addendum because you guys are just trying to fix something that occurred during the transaction, where this is an actual negotiation process that can expire. So it helps you out. So you say, okay, I'm willing to go pay $305 for the property, but I need to know by this time. If they don't respond by that time, you can just let it expire. And now you're back to square one renegotiating. So that's why we use this counteroffer in play. All right, any questions on this simple yet effective counteroffer? Type it in if you do have a question on it, or when's the best time to use it. But this is part of the negotiation process, is the counteroffer. All right. Let's go back to addendums. Bazillion different addendums. Make sure you pick the right one. The one that we use for the purchase agreement is this one. And it's pretty simple. We number it, whether you start with 1, 2, or 3, or you like A, B, C. It lets us know who the buyer is, who the seller is, and what date that the contract was signed. So that's the most important, so that we know which contract we're referring to. So the date that that contract is signed reflects back to the purchase agreement or the last counteroffer that was signed. And then this is where we would make any changes. And I always like to number what we're dealing with because it might be one or two different things. This isn't exactly the repair request one, but sometimes I see agents use this to address either additional inspections or additional times. So if the appraisal doesn't come in, this is where you would put 1, purchase price to be whatever the appraisal came in. 2, if you're extending a due diligence or a loan contingency. 3, whatever else you guys are addressing. Sometimes it might be like the patio furniture staying, or the washer dryer needs to stay. It's perfectly fine once you've got an executed purchase agreement to start using addendums. If you don't have a purchase agreement, that means you're kind of still in that counter offer stage, and you should be using counter offers. So if you needed more space, which you shouldn't, because what happens when you start typing in here, these lines go away and they just fill in the blank. But if you have like a novel you need to write, you can check mark here. And then there is, and that notifies them that this addendum is not complete without the additional terms on that attached page. So if you needed additional terms, that's the long form, and you want to check that if you're adding it to the contract, so that they know that there's an additional form to look for. When I say they, that's everybody that you're cooperating with. That's your lender, escrow, transaction coordinator, and the office here, so that we there's additional pages on that. And then it also notifies us that when both parties execute it, that it's made an integral part of the aforementioned purchase agreement. So we name the purchase agreement at the top with the date that it's executed. This goes into the file and it's added. Again, when this is executed by a buyer and a seller, the 5-day rule applies in Nevada, so you have to turn that into us so that we know that the contract was modified on this form. So make sure you turn it in, and everybody gets copies. Buyer, seller, agents, escrow, so that they know that we're changing something. Lenders, so that they know we're changing something. It is now part of the purchase agreement. So that deals with another issue. So the lender has to be privy to any changes of the purchase agreement so that they can notify all their parties. So even if you're negotiating not solar panels, let me give you an example, pool chairs or something like that. Even though it's not relevant, you are adjusting the purchase agreement, so everybody would get a copy of that. If the 2 deck chairs are staying, makes absolutely 0 sense, but if you put it on an addendum, everybody gets a copy of it, because now we've altered that purchase agreement. All right, so that's the general one that we make most of our changes on. It's pretty simple, nothing exciting. Let's see if there's any addendums I want to run through with you guys. In case you haven't used the additional page, here's what it looks like. So this addresses additional page, and then this document is not valid without the first page, which includes the property address, names, and signature blocks. So they do have to sign the first page and initial off on this additional terms. That's if you guys have a novel to write that will fit on the additional page. Okay. All right. Post-possession, I think we dealt with that one. I'm seeing a lot more of. And that's because you see you see it in agent-to-agent remarks, seller would like a lease back for 30 days or 40 days. And a lot of people are just giving it to them because they have nothing else except for time. Let's see what other addendum would be good. We need the listing agreement. All right, how about addendums for listing agreements? So your listing agreement's a contract. Sometimes you'll need to make some changes to your listing agreement. For the most part, an addendum to the listing agreement is going to be your Mls change order. It specifically says in your listing agreement that any changes to the listing agreement can be done with an Mls change order. That is probably your number one go-to for any changes to your listing agreement. That is change order. And the reason being is that our listing agreement coincides with the MLS, and it's basically just instructions for how to put the information into the MLS. So if we're making changes to the listing agreement, then we'll use this multiple listing service because that's what we're agreeing to use. You'll put the address, property types, either condo, single family, townhouse, what the current MLS number is, what the price is. And big thing is extending the listing agreement. So if it expires, a week from now, you want to extend out to, 2 more months, then you put those dates in here. The other thing that people use it for is changing from the selling price. So if you're overpriced at $425 and you're trying to change it to $399, this is where you would do that adjustment. And putting the subject property back on the market. So if you went off the market, you put it back on the market. I mean, for the most part, it's kind of agreed if something is canceled that you'll go back on the market. But this is where we can change that status in the MLS. So now in our listing agreement, we have under contract show and under contract no show automatically in there. So you should know which one you're going to write off the listing agreement. But say that it says seller to choose at time, I think is one of the options in the listing agreement. This is where you would have them sign off how they want it broadcasted in the MLS, whether it's under contract no show or under contract show. No show if you've been getting 10 showings a day and they don't want to be bothered anymore. Show if you are you took an offer that's subject or contingent upon the sale of another property, you'd probably want to continue showing it. and get it scheduled. And then any other additional terms would go in here. On market dates, or say you're running behind from the date that you're supposed to be on the market, you can just put those right in there. This one, once you fill it out, goes out to the seller and then to me, and I date and stamp it pretty quick. And then your name goes here so that they know that you're making those adjustments. That is an addendum to the listing agreement. Call it a change order. So when we're doing compliance on your listing agreements and we check your history in the MLS and there's price changes or it's on market, off market, we're looking for this to balance the history. So every time you make a change in the MLS, we're looking for this to be uploaded to us, that the seller authorized you to make those changes. All right, any questions on addendums versus counteroffers? Let's see if there's any other. The coming soon addendum. I see this a lot, especially with the inventory. So if we look at coming soon, which is properties that will hit the market in the next 30 days. 173 coming up in the next 30 days. So if you're coming soon, if you do a coming soon, you can do up to 30 days out. What that enables is that it's in the MLS with a co-op on it, because you know you're paying a co-op out. But what that helps with is with your buyers. If your buyers are searching or you have them in a portal and you have coming soon check marked, that means they'll get those listings and that they know that they'll be on the market soon. So you always want to check mark what's active and what's coming soon when you're creating your portals. But on a listing side, here's what you have to get filled out in order for that to occur. It's an addendum. It's a listing agreement coming soon. And the reason we came up with this form is so that the sellers understand what a coming soon status is, and then who gets access to it. And how it goes in with one image, blah, blah, blah. So if you have a coming soon, which is a good way to market a property that's not quite ready, or you're getting pictures, or getting signs, or you're getting the property cleaned, or you're getting a door fixed or a window fixed, this is the best form to use. And then you are letting the seller know what the on-market date is here. And again, that's something seller signs off, you sign off as a designated licensee, and then I have to sign off on, so that we're aware that it's being marketed as a coming soon listing. Addendum. All right. Let's see what other addendum I can run through. do short sell note. We don't do property management here, so all these addendums for property management are not fun. Here's another one, cancellation of purchase agreement. This is an addendum. And earnest money release. So this is the preferred form for canceling your escrow. Again, notifies the address between buyer and seller. Make sure you have both those names in there. And then, who's canceling? Both buyer and seller cancels the agreement for the following reasons. So put which paragraph of the purchase agreement they're canceling on, or otherwise it's a mutual agreement or other. It's either 1, 2, or 3. By this time, you should know the escrow number, who the escrow officer is. And then, what are we doing with the earnest money? Couple selections there. Either it's going back to the buyer, either it's going to the seller. Or we're instructing escrow to hold the money until we receive subsequent mutual instructions or a judicial decision. So if the buyer and seller say, no, I'm taking you to court, then number 3 is probably the one to instruct escrow to hold the money, unless you have an other, which is number 4. Once it's ratified by both parties, escrow should be able to follow your instructions and release funds. Check with escrow because each has their own policy on whether or not this form works for them or if they require an internal form to get signed. Most of them will acknowledge this signed by both parties and release the funds. Addendum. Cancel. Any of you guys have questions out there? Type them in the little box on the right. All right. That's about it on our difference between addendums and counteroffers. If you guys have any questions, just reach out to me or type them in the chat. I didn't see anything useful to share with you guys, except we're eliminating area numbers. I'm sure you guys have that countdown. Shut this off. Yeah, so old school guys like me, we're going to be lost for a while with the areas being gone.
I saw that. What is this mean?
You know, like 405, 404.
Oh, well, you guys been on MLS on this. I don't know. They keep popping up. I don't know what that means.
It's how we used to put properties in. Yeah, instead of zip codes, it was area, and so like we all know 505, 504, 503. If I'm searching the Southwest area, I would type those areas in and just look for properties. Now we're relying on geographical, and they're going to take that away from basically because county and tax assessors used to use the areas too.
I have a question. Do you know anything about the Henderson tax they were talking about?
The Henderson tax increase?
Yeah.
I don't know too much about it. Yeah. I can find out for you, but yeah, I'm sure they're trying to increase revenue.
Like more than Clark County, or
is it less? I don't know. I think it's an additional tax, is what it is.
Oh, like
SIDS and LIDS is a municipal bond, so that's a little bit different.
Okay.
You can actually invest in municipal bonds. I like them a lot, but all that is they compile investors and their money, and then they use it to build sewers, electricity, roads, and then they tax the homeowner for using that money. So that's how the investor gets paid back on the municipal bonds. Property taxes in general is just revenue for the area, and they'll use that to improve schools, parks, sidewalks, fire departments, police, municipalities, anything that is publicly funded would come from an increase in property taxes. Yeah. So SIDS, LIDS, municipal bonds. Yeah. And because usually those get paid off after a certain amount, whereas property taxes never go away.
Yeah.
Where the SIDS will have an ending date, like 14 years out.
Oh, okay.
10 to 14 years. Somebody will pay for it for 7 years, they'll transfer, and those 7 years left on the municipal bond. Yeah. That's LIDS and SIDS. Nah, interesting stuff as far as investments, but if you are like bored one day, you can read about municipal bonds. I think they're interesting.
I mean, I didn't know
Yeah.
it. We're done?
That's it. That's all I have. I just wanted to go over counteroffers versus addendums. Let me stop my stream. Bye, guys. Jenny, thanks for commenting. I am out. Ta-da.